What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today we're going to be discussing my street photographs in today's street photography breakdown part 7. And so with these videos, my goal is to just share with you everything that I've learned along my journey, sharing with you the behind the scenes of my photographs, breaking down the compositions, and giving you some advice that hopefully you can apply to your practice. And so with example number 1, we have the children of Mumbai. And as I approach this new village here in the beautiful hillsides of Mumbai, it was a random place. I was actually with a local photographer, and the photographer said that he's never traveled up the hill. And I always have this eagerness in me to want to explore the unknown. And ultimately, I believe this is the duty of the photographer, is to explore the uncharted areas and, not just go to the hot spots or the most bustling places. And so as I explored this new neighborhood, I became intrigued, and I found myself walking along a pipeline and then discovered this scene that unfolded naturally. And so as I broke down this photograph, I essentially decided to get as close as physically possible to the subjects in the scene. And so by filling the frame here on the left-hand side, we have this boy's eye that is revealed, adding some mystery and intrigue, where his eye is striking and popping out right in the foreground of the frame, in relationship to the boy that's seated next to him, who's looking up towards him with his hand holding a popsicle stick. And this comes through being physically close in proximity. By being physically close in proximity, you can create a photograph with more impact, highlighting those gestures and highlighting those things that matter most in the frame and leaving out the superfluous details. On the right hand side, we have the girls with the children standing in front of the doorway, adding more depth to the image. And then finally, we have a clean backdrop here with that simple wall. We have the laundry line holding up that doorway. And it's a very simple frame, actually. As much as the complex elements come together through the revealing eye and the gesture, there's actually something to be said about the way that I make a photograph in these chaotic environments. And so the first thing that I want to emphasize is when you're analyzing a scene and you're looking at life in front of you, there's so much chaos, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, how do I put order to it? By getting physically close, you can start to make these relationships very intuitively. And as the boy was standing there in front of me, I decided that in that split second, chopping off half of his face and revealing his eye would add a little bit more interest to the photograph. It was just a very simple compositional decision that I made due to the chaos in the scene. It just sort of naturally fell into place. And then finally, making a frame that is easy to read, where the background is simple and not cluttered with overlap, I think is also very critical. And so with this very simple scene, I use the doorway and the wall as a backdrop or a stage for my subjects to stand in front of. Example number 2, we have the swimmers in Mumbai. And so I love photographing by the water. I think any location where there is water, an ocean, a lake, or any body of water for that matter, lends itself really well for making clean photographs, where you always have a clean horizon line, you always have a clean backdrop, and the water becomes this very simple and elegant place for you to make a photo. And so similar to the way in which I included that boy's eye in the foreground of the frame, I also made a compositional decision right off the bat here with this hand on the right-hand side. And so I want to emphasize how I make these relationships and why I make these relationships. And so when I photograph, I see the world in layers, and I see the world with complexity, and the different elements that I see in front of me in these different scenes, I think about how I can include them from the foreground, middle ground, and then finally in the background. And so of course I'm interested in that skyline in the background, and I see the scene that's unfolding with the children playing. But in order for me to add more visual interest and impact to the foreground of the photograph, I'm looking and analyzing the different gestures and different ways in which I can include something in the foreground to add that extra layer. And so I saw this boy who was standing passively on the right-hand side and decided to include his hand in the foreground. Finally, we have, breaking down this composition, the boy who's seated on that rock there, looking out towards the left-hand side of the frame. In relationship to the rest of the boys who are playing in the water, we have a lot of different people here. There's a bit of chaos going on. These children are playing and jumping in the water and leaping around. And so to make a photograph of a scene like this, I need to emphasize that you should work the scene, make more photographs than less, and keep moving your body and making these relationships intuitively, such as me making that relationship between the hand and this boy's gestures outstretched. And so by including that hand in the foreground, we now have more visual impact for this moment, this decisive moment of the boy who's getting ready to fall back into the water with his arms outstretched. And this occurred through me being patient and prepared to press the shutter and lining things up and being aware of my foreground, my middle ground, and my background, and then finally waiting for that decisive moment of a boy leaping, of somebody gesturing. And so this came through lots of shots. This came through me being patient and photographing through the scene as it unfolded. And then finally we have the background with that tilted horizon line with the skyline. We have that smoggy sky with the water rushing. And there's something to be said about making photographs once again by the water, as it provides with you this minimalist backdrop to work with, making the photograph of chaos easy to read. And so here are the swimmers of Mumbai. Example number 3, we have a breakdancer on Market Street, and this was a photograph that I made on a beautiful summer day, observing the dancers as they sort of toss and turn across the concrete here outside of the convention center. And so as this man was leaping and jumping over and over again, I observed the dancers. It was a very bustling environment. There was something beautiful here, and I could sense the possibility of a photograph due to the sheer athletic ability of this man. And I was intrigued, and I was watching the way that they jump, and I was aware of this pattern of human behavior, right? And so it's very critical for you as a street photographer to pick up on pattern recognition, whether you see somebody yawning or gesturing, opening a door, moving their hands, moving their feet, or like here we have a breakdancer doing a backflip. And so by observing this backflip over and over again, I was able to patiently work the scene and position my body in a particular way that helped tell the story of this frame. And so we have the breakdancer in the foreground flipping upside down in relationship to these two other people on the left and right hand side, adding more depth to the photograph and setting the scene. And then finally, the magic of this photograph and the luck of the draw of me making the picture at this moment happened to be this shadow that reveals the full body of the man. And so the beauty of this frame is the fact that you can't see the full body of the man who's doing the backflip, as his legs are a bit cut off, but the shadow reveals his full physique and his full body, and I think that adds more visual interest and mystery. The man almost looks as though he's like hanging from a string. In relationship to this beautiful background with lots of leading lines, we have the beautiful light and shadow play, the crushing black deep shadows in the background in relationship to those different columns, a very simple and elegant background to work with. And so we have the result of the breakdancer flipping upside down with his shadow revealed, adding that visual interest. And so this came through me being very patient and watching as this man jumped over and over again. With pattern recognition, you'll recognize that sort of fraction of a second to press the shutter through your intuition. And so this comes through practice and patience and being hyper aware with the different patterns that exist. And then by watching and observing over and over again, you can force your luck at that moment you press the shutter. And so example number 4, I have another backflip in Zambia. And so this is a completely different scene. These children were making bricks. They were actually gathering sand and working. And then as I approached the scene with my camera, they started to perform and do some tricks. And so as they were doing these backflips, I was of course interested in that decisive moment. And so as the man went to flip, I got down low and pressed the shutter. And so the most critical thing about this composition is not only the backflip, but the different people. So on the left and right hand side, we have 2 more boys adding more depth. And then finally, this man here who's running in the front of the frame, filling that foreground element with that beautiful gesture with his head cut off. And this is something that happened through me being there and being present, pressing the shutter more than less. But the most important compositional decision and thing that I can definitely point out in this particular frame is the background. And so you can see the beautiful sand, the beautiful blue sky. And in order for me to create this photograph, I had to drop physically low to the ground to reveal the backflip against that blue sky. And so photography requires you to be physical, on your toes, to solve these visual puzzles of putting together the foreground, middle ground, and background, and synthesizing the formal elements of composition with the content or the impact of the decisive moment of the backflip. And so we have the result of the boy doing this elegant backflip with his arms and legs outstretched, which was a very joyous moment. I actually really like making photographs of just these like beautiful, joyous moments of youth, these beautiful moments of people doing incredible things, because I believe it uplifts humanity and it champions humanity. And to me, that's the goal of a photographer, is to treat the people within our frames like heroes. And so we have here the final photograph, example number 5, the sleeping man in Hanoi. And this was a very simple photograph. It was one of the last photographs I remember making during my trip. And I remember seeing this man who was sleeping on his motorcycle. In Hanoi, you can see so many people sleeping on their motorcycles. So many people are working and sleeping in the same environment that they are working in. And there's so much chaos and beauty in Hanoi, and I really enjoyed my time there. However, during this moment, I noticed right off the bat this man sleeping. And so I approached the sleeping man, got as close as physically possible to that sleeping man, filling the left-hand side of the frame with basically half of the frame, filling the composition with that gesture of the man sleeping with his arms outstretched on his forehead in relationship to the advertisement. And so this is what drew me in to make the picture, was not only the man sleeping, but the relationship I can make from the man sleeping to the advertisement of that hand gesturing and stirring that espresso. And so there's this dichotomy or juxtaposition, we can call it, between this man and the advertisement of the espresso. So it's like the man sleeping. When he wakes up, he's probably going to have a coffee. And then we have in the background just more advertisement here. It almost looks like it's like this man is like pasted into the scene, which is an interesting visual aesthetic choice. You know, it's almost as if he's in a restaurant, but he's in front of an advertisement. It's this strange space. And we have that, of course, juxtaposition between the man sleeping and the energy from that espresso there in the background. And we have the gestures of the hands repeated from right to left. And so I look at hands and gestures as something that triggers me to press the shutter a lot of the times. There's just something about hands that I believe helps tell a story. And so if you learned something today in this video, please feel free to visit my website at decisive.com, where you can find more resources on my street photography. I have a free PDF with my contact sheets. I also have a video titled How I Mastered Street Photography. There's a blog post where I break down the different photo books that inspired me. You can feel free to check out my Ricoh GR guide to mastering the Ricoh. There's a lot of different resources there. I also have a YouTube playlist with my videos from Mumbai. You can feel free to watch the POV behind the scenes of how I make photographs on the streets. And stay tuned for the next video. With that being said, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace. Whoops.